Hello and welcome. This is DW News live from Berlin. The end of an era in Cuba as Fidel Castro's ashes are interred. Thousands of people have been turning out to pay their last respects to the island's revolutionary leader in his hometown of Santiago de Cuba. Also on the programme, both candidates in Austria's presidential runoff have cast their ballots. It's been a divisive and hard-fought election which could deliver post-war Europe's first far-right head of state since World War II. Pollsters say the result is too close to predict. And in Italy, Prime Minister Matteo Renzi has cast his vote in a referendum he's staked his political future on. He says he'll resign if he loses the ballot. My name is Christopher Springate. Good to have you with us. The ashes of late Cuban leader Fidel Castro have arrived in the eastern city of Santiago de Cuba, which is regarded as the birthplace of his Cuban revolution. Crowds lined up along the road to pay their final tributes to the former president as the ashes were being driven to a local cemetery for the last rites. This marks the end of a week of tributes and mass rallies for the communist leader, who died last month at the age of 90. His brother Raúl Castro promised to uphold Fidel's ideals. Official Cuban media reported the ceremony would be, quote, solemn and private and would not be broadcast live as had been expected. Okay, we're going to talk now to DW's Sal Ahmed. He's on the line from the capital, Havana. Sal, just give us a sense of the mood in Cuba on this final day of mourning for Fidel Castro.
Christopher, the more and more Cubans I speak to, a clear distinction seems to appear. I've been watching the proceedings of the funeral, but obviously not being broadcast live on TV, with a middle-class Cuban family, 3 generations of it. The grandparents are clearly distraught. There's a sense of national tragedy with them. They seem to have lost a spiritual father, they tell me. They very vividly remember the days after the revolution. They remember in the 90s when they tell me that Fidel's leadership really outshone and he saved the country from absolute economic disaster. The husband and wife, who are in their middle ages, the husband works for the state and the wife works for the private sector, they are more pragmatic. They say, look, we do need economic change. The husband thinks that they don't perhaps need political change so quickly. And that's sort of indicative of anybody who works for the state here. 80% of the workforce here is obviously still employed by the state. The children who are in their teens are still sleeping, and that, again, is also very indicative. The younger generations of Cubans don't really care about the political goings-on in the country. They want a better future for themselves.
OK, Sal, many thanks for that. Sal Ahmed there reporting from Havana. And we now have Professor Ottmar Etter in the studio with us, a Cuba specialist with Germany's Potsdam University. Professor Etter, thank you very much for joining us. Castro's always been a polarizing figure, you know, a human monument for millions of Cubans, but, you know, a repressive dictator for many other Cubans. Let's start perhaps with his achievements. What can Cubans be thankful for when they look back on his rule of the country?
There's a kind of new feeling of independence in the 20th century when it comes to power in '59. There's a feeling of progress in during the first decade. Also, alphabetization, the health system, and so forth. So there are many things, even at a continental level. Let's say regarding Latin America, he is still. And I'm just back from Mexico. It was absolutely inspiring seeing the elite of many different Latin American countries right now in Mexico, and there was a deep veneration, I would say, on behalf of the political achievements and so forth. On the other hand, of course, it's a dictatorship. It has been a dictatorship.
He had his dark sides, didn't he? I mean, he had many of his opponents and critics executed, many of them imprisoned. How is history going to judge that ultimately?
Okay, in his sense, that he will be not gilding. guilty, as he was pleading for. But I would say there are mixed feelings about him, and everything depends on the way the myth of Fidel Castro will be developed right now. Cubans and the Cuban regime is expert in maintaining the power, and myths have always played a major role in Cuban history. José Martí, but even the Argentine Che Guevara. So there was...
The former, the independence leader.
Exactly, and as he died in '95, Castro, inverting the figures, 59, coming to power in 59, felt as kind of continuation of José Martí. And so he was always dealing with that kind of continuity in Cuban history. And the continuity is to be in a different rhythm. So when Latin America becomes independent, Cuba is still Spanish. When Spain intervenes again in Cuba, Cuba becomes dependent of the U.S. And then, at a given moment when the U.S. is expanding, Cuba is trying to build up its own history in relationship with the Soviet Union and other partners. So it's an absolutely amazing history in that sense. And so the myth of Fidel Castro is deeply embedded in a long-term history in the Cuban context.
And we'll see, obviously, in the months to come whether that myth is continued. Professor Ottmar Etter from Potsdam University, thanks very much for talking to us.
It's been a pleasure.
Now, moving on to other news. People in Italy are going to the polls today in a referendum on constitutional reform, which will probably decide the future of the country's Prime Minister, Matteo Renzi. Renzi wants to reduce the role of Italy's upper house of parliament, the Senate, and also reclaim some powers from regional authorities. He said he'll resign if he loses the vote.
Voters trickle in to cast their ballots before dawn. They understand the significance of this referendum. Their choice between yes and no will decide the fate of the Italian Prime Minister and that of the country he governs. I voted yes. The reasons of the yes camp prevail, even if the reform would have disadvantages. Streamlining would mean the removal of this perfect bicameralism that I find redundant. I think this is good for young people, for the young people's future, just for them. I'm too old. But not everyone shares that attitude. Fundamental rules have to be shared by all political parties and not be approved by relying heavily on a majority vote, so I don't like the arrogance with which this constitutional reform has been proposed. That's a message that seems to be resonating with voters. Current polls point to a victory for the no camp. A no vote could push Italy into a period of political and economic uncertainty.
Austrians are also going to the polls today, with voters there choosing a new president. Independent candidate Alexander van der Bellen cast his ballot earlier today. The presidential runoff is a rerun of a ballot conducted 6 months ago, but annulled due to voting irregularities. Many analysts are giving the edge to van der Bellen's opponent, the far-right populist candidate Norbert Hofer. If he wins, he would become Europe's first far-right head of state since the end of World War II.
Their message is not subtle. The protesters' banners read, "No Nazis in the Hofburg," Austria's presidential office. The quote Nazi to whom they refer is Norbert Hofer, the head of the far-right Freedom Party. There are only about 100 people gathered at this protest in Vienna, but the most important thing for them is simply to show that this candidate is not acceptable.
We think he's a Nazi because he's a German fraternity. He still wears the cornflower. He is very racist. He is also not just racist, but also against the rights of women. And basically, I think he's a danger for our country.
This is not a pro-Van der Bellen event. This isn't a call to vote for him, but it's simply a call to say that Norbert Hofer cannot be the choice Austria makes. Hofer's supporters, of course, see this rather differently. Hofer has positioned himself as the David in this Goliath fight and is taking on a bit of a Donald Trump-like mantle, saying he will fight the establishment. His supporters hope he will be the final victor in what is the third round of these presidential elections. Simply the issues, then his behavior, his gentle behavior, how he approaches people. From the beginning, he spoke the truth. That's the deciding factor for me. These are also characteristics that the supporters of Alexander Van der Bellen say their candidate has. Van der Bellen, the Liberal Green Party politician, has painted himself as a man of the middle, someone who stands for reason instead of extremes. In the end, only the voters can decide which of the two is more credible.
Turning now to some sports news. In the Bundesliga, Saturday's late game saw high-flying Leipzig take on resurgent Schalke. The Bundesliga new boys needed a win to go top of the table, but Schalke went into the match unbeaten in 12 games in all competitions. The whole thing left that tie finally balanced.
One last team talk and Leipzig were off. In the very first minute, an attack saw Timo Werner go down under a challenge from Ralf Fährmann. The referee awarded a penalty, although replays showed Werner had dived. Fährmann was incensed by the decision, and his mood didn't improve when Werner stepped up to convert the spot kick. 1-0 to Leipzig. Leipzig kept their foot on the gas and almost doubled their lead. Yusuf Poulsen was inches away from making it 2-0. Without a fight. But it all went wrong for them after half time. Leipzig pushed for another goal. But for Leipzig, the dream start to the season continues.
Borussia Mönchengladbach. Dortmund haven't fully convinced so far this season. They needed 3 points to stay in touch with the top of the table. As for Gladbach, a 7-game winless streak has left coach André Schubert under pressure.
Once again, it was a sellout crowd in Dortmund. A tough place to come for André Schubert's Mönchengladbach, who hadn't won since September. But Gladbach silenced the home fans in the 6th minute. Raphael found a hole in the Dortmund defence. Control of the game and took the lead in the 15th minute. Marco Reus won the ball on the hour mark. Again as Reus got his 3rd assist of the day. The league leaders.
Saturday game to secure a 3-2 away win in Wolfsburg. They went behind twice in the first half, with this goal from Paul Seguin giving Wolfsburg to give Hertha a victory that consolidates their 3rd place. Bundesliga results this weekend so far, as we saw Leipzig edging out Schalke, the Borussia battle going Dortmund's way. Big wins for Hoffenheim, Hertha, as we also saw, and Bremen. Leverkusen couldn't go beyond a draw. Bayern winning against Mainz on Friday evening, and later today Darmstadt face Hamburg and Augsburg host Frankfurt. What does that mean for the Bundesliga standings? Well, Leipzig keep that three-point cushion over Bayern at the top of the table. Hertha, as mentioned, still in third, ahead of unbeaten Hoffenheim and Dortmund. In the bottom half, things are beginning to look bleak for Wolfsburg. They tumble to 15th. That's just above the relegation zone. Darmstadt and Ingolstadt ahead of winless Hamburg in last place. Quick reminder of our top story for you. You're watching DW News in Berlin. Do stay with us.
Crime Fighters. The new season of radio crime thrillers begins. 4 investigative cases that will keep you on your toes.
Crime Fighters stories are the best idea ever. So every young person needs to listen to Crime Fighters and share. Tell a friend, tell a friend, tell a friend.
Crime Fighters. Don't miss it.
According to the national balance sheets, they have a collective wealth of 16.8 trillion euros. But what does each and every one of them own? What are their secret hiding places, and what are their innermost wishes?
There's a big dream for very many Germans, and that's the dream of owning a home.
Why are Germans so attached to their possessions, big and small?
We need possessions for our memories. We want to say, this is who I am.
What do German place names reveal about the country's treasures? What is Germany's most precious treasure? This is a journey through the country and its history. Germany in numbers that reveal a lot about what's valuable to its people and what they want to preserve.
It's about the memory of a nation, and that's of immeasurable value.
Learn about the Germans and their personal riches. What is the average German like? The vaults of the Bundesbank in Frankfurt. The Germans keep a very special treasure here that only few have access to. 1,036 tons of pure gold. The gold reserves of the Federal Republic of Germany. But only a portion of them. Germany's gold is deliberately not all kept in one place.
Nobody likes having gold lying around in the cellar. It's an extremely hard currency, making it appealing for thieves. It needs to be guarded.
That's why, since the 60s, when the country's wealth increased, the Germans have distributed their wealth all around the world. In London and Paris, but most of it's in New York. Germany owns 3,391 tons of gold in almost 271,000 gold bars. They're worth a total of 56 billion euros, depending on the going rate. German companies are much more valuable. Shares in 865 are traded publicly. Their overall value is 3.2 trillion euros. The state's property and infrastructure is worth 1.9 trillion, but the lion's share of German wealth is located elsewhere.
That's something we easily forget in Germany. In our country, it's the average citizen, the famous Mittelstand, that owns the majority of these 16.8 trillion euros.
And this is him, the average German. His name, Thomas Müller. In contrast to his ancestors, he doesn't work in a factory or a workshop anymore. Thomas Müller works in an office, typing, stapling and filing, instead of soldering, hammering and welding. He works largely to rule. Only 12% of Germans are motivated at work. And he wastes 14% of his working time with bureaucracy and talks that lead nowhere. He makes an average of €3,391 per month, gross. Since he only spends 7 years of his life in front of a desk, he doesn't have much time to make himself, in other words the Germans, rich. But he has a crucial advantage. There are roughly 80 million of him. That's why people like him, average Germans, are the engine behind the country's wealth. What do Germans own? Every single one of them. All of them together. What is most valuable to them?